Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
We had been living in the house for 4 years, enjoying the quiet street and the slow rhythm of the neighborhood. Mara and I had bought it knowing the HOA was supposedly disbanded. For years it had been a non-issue. We paid the tiny $25 annual fee the first year just to avoid any potential trouble. Then nothing. Life was simple. That simplicity ended with a single envelope. I remember standing in the kitchen, Mara chopping vegetables behind me as I slid it open. The letter was from the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. The first line made my stomach drop: violation notice. Apparently, the rocks in our front garden were illegal. Not just any rocks. They were unauthorized decorative stones, the wrong shape and color. I held the paper in disbelief. "Mara, they're alive," I said quietly, though she knew exactly what I meant. She came over and peered at the letter. "Alive? I mean active again. The HOA, I thought it was gone," she frowned. 4 years of peace and now this, what's next? The lawn, I shrugged, but my chest tightened. "I don't know. I guess I'll call the number and find out." The voice on the other end was smooth but cold. Harold Benson, the HOA president, introduced himself immediately. I explained that the HOA had been inactive and that we had never signed any binding documents. "Buying the house automatically binds you," Harold said. No hesitation, no explanation. I tried to argue, to reason, but he cut me off with practiced calm. "Rules still apply. Compliance is expected." I hung up, staring at the receiver. My hand shook slightly. Mara put a hand on my shoulder. "We can just pay the fine for now," she said. "It's easier." I didn't feel relief. I felt the slow crawl of unease. But we did what she said. We paid. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A week later another envelope arrived. This time it was about our garage door paint. The color apparently did not match the HOA-approved shade, though the HOA had been inactive when we bought the house. I felt a flush of anger. "Alex, look at this," Mara said, reading over my shoulder. "They're targeting us for everything now. They're not joking," I said. I could feel my jaw tighten, and it's only going to get worse. I went for a walk to clear my head. Linda, our neighbor, was trimming her hedges. She looked up and waved. "Hey, Linda," I called. "Have you heard from Oak Ridge lately?" She froze, then her eyes narrowed. I got a notice last month, something about my mailbox flag. They said the color wasn't approved." I ignored it. I shook my head. "They're back in business, and they're serious." Linda's lips pressed together. "I think they've been planning this quietly, maybe testing the waters before hitting everyone." Walking back home, my mind was spinning. The streets looked normal. Kids were playing, birds were chirping. Yet somewhere in the neighborhood, rules had returned with teeth, and the people in charge had no intention of letting them go. That night, Mara and I sat at the kitchen table with the letters spread out like weapons. "I feel like we're under siege," she said quietly. "We are," I replied, "and it's just starting." I glanced at the clock. A sharp knock came at the door. I opened it slowly. A uniformed delivery person handed me another envelope. My hands were cold as I tore it open. It was from Oak Ridge. Another violation, this one for our walkway. Apparently, the spacing between the slabs didn't match HOA standards. The fine was already added, and the tone made it clear it would escalate if ignored. Mara's hand found mine. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" I swallowed hard. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that something was very wrong. And this time it wasn't just about stones or paint. Whatever Harold and the board had planned, they were serious. And I had a sinking feeling it was only going to get worse. I looked at the envelope again, my pulse quickening. Beyond it lay weeks of struggle, threats, and the creeping realization that this HOA had found a way to claw its way back into every corner of our lives. And the worst part, I had no idea how many of our neighbors were next. I dropped the letter onto the counter and sank into the chair. The silence in the house pressed down on me. Outside, the street was calm, but inside everything had changed. The HOA was back, and they weren't stopping for anyone. The next morning I woke to the sun filtering through the curtains, but the light felt harsh rather than warm. The envelope from Oak Ridge lay on the counter, unopened. Mara was already in the kitchen, making coffee, her movements precise and steady. I envied her calm. The week had been relentless. Every day brought another note, another demand, another fine. What had started as a minor annoyance had become a drain on our savings. I sipped my coffee, feeling the tension coil in my chest. "This is getting ridiculous," Mara said, not looking at me. "They're inventing rules as they go." I nodded, staring out the window at the quiet street. A few kids rode bikes and the neighbors tended gardens like normal people, oblivious to the storm slowly creeping toward them. "I know," I said. "It's like they've been waiting for an excuse." I picked up the phone and dialed the HOA number again. This time I wasn't expecting reason. Harold Benson answered almost immediately, calm and unyielding. "Mr. Turner," he said, "the board expects all members to maintain compliance." "I've complied with everything you've said so far," I said. "We've fixed the stones, the walkway, the paint. And now what? More fines?" He didn't apologize or explain. "The rules are cumulative. Non-compliance carries penalties." I hung up, running my hands through my hair. I felt trapped in a system designed to punish without justification. Mara reached for my hand. "We can't let them push us around. We need proof." That afternoon I started combing through old paperwork, digging for anything that could prove the HOA had been inactive when we bought the house. Years of documents, emails, and old letters filled the dining table. Mara sat beside me making notes, her face tense but determined. Hours passed, and my stomach knotted with frustration. Every time I thought we had a solid argument, I remembered the stack of new letters still unopened. Fines for misaligned lights. Fines for garden decorations. The absurdity of it made me laugh bitterly. A sound without humor. "I'm calling Linda," I said. "She might know more about how they operate." Linda answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. She told me about her mailbox flagged, the fine she hadn't paid, and how she had been intimidated into complying. I realized this wasn't just about us. It was systematic. Harold and his board had found a way to exploit the neighborhood quietly, targeting one house at a time. Mara listened over my shoulder, her eyes widening. "They're doing this to everyone," she said softly. "Not just us," I nodded grimly. "And we're going to stop them. But we need a lawyer." The next few days were a blur. We hired one, met with him in a cramped office, and laid out every letter, every fine, every absurd claim. The lawyer, Mr. Jennings, leafed through the stack, his eyebrows knitting together. "You have a strong argument," he said finally. "The HOA is voluntary. There's no evidence your property ever joined it. They've been acting beyond their authority." I felt a spark of hope, but it was tempered by Mara's look. "They won't just back down," she said. "Not Harold, not Karen." Karen, one of the board members, known for her relentless pursuit of rules, often personally enforcing fines. Her reputation was enough to make even Harold pause, but she thrived on intimidation. Weeks passed. We corrected every violation, followed every instruction, and still the letters kept coming. Each notice seemed to escalate in tone and fines. The financial pressure was real, but the emotional weight was worse. Mara stayed up nights worrying, and I found myself constantly checking the mailbox, dreading the next envelope. Then it happened. One evening, while I was organizing the documents for the lawyer, the front door clicked. A delivery envelope slid across the porch. I froze. Mara came over slowly. The address matched ours. Another violation. I opened it with shaking hands. It was for exterior lighting placement. They claimed we hadn't aligned the lights according to the HOA's visual standards. My stomach sank. This was the same adjustment we had made weeks ago. Mara's face turned pale. "Alex, they're not stopping. They'll keep escalating." I looked out the window, down the quiet street. I could see neighbors inside their homes, unaware of the creeping control Harold and his board wielded. I clenched my fists. "This isn't just harassment anymore," I said. "It's a war." Mara nodded, swallowing hard. "And we're in the front line." I leaned against the counter, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. I knew what we had to do next: gather evidence, document everything, fight back. But I also knew Harold was already planning his next move. Then the phone rang. The display said Oak Ridge HOA. My pulse quickened. Mara grabbed my arm, urging me not to pick it up. I stared at the screen. One ring, two rings, then it went silent. I hung up, feeling a chill. It wasn't just fines anymore. Harold and his board were watching, waiting, planning. And I knew without a doubt that the real battle was about to begin. We spent the weekend going through every document we could find. The dining table was buried under papers, closing documents, emails from the real estate agent, even old HOA letters from neighbors. Mara was taking notes while I cross-checked dates and signatures. "This proves it," I said finally, tapping a yellowed sheet of paper. "Our parcel never signed anything. The HOA had no right to enforce rules against us." Mara leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the line. "And this is the proof we need. We can take this to a lawyer." I nodded. Relief mixed with anger. I can't believe we paid fines for 4 years and they just ignored all of this. Monday morning we met with Mr. Jennings, our lawyer. He was a tall man with glasses that always slid down his nose. He scanned the documents, murmuring to himself, flipping back and forth between pages. "You have a very solid case," he said finally. "This HOA is voluntary. There's no record of your property joining. Any fines they've levied are, frankly, unenforceable." Mara exhaled. "So we're not responsible, not legally," Mr. Jennings confirmed. "But that doesn't mean they won't fight back. Harold Benson and his board have a history of bullying homeowners." I felt a chill. You mean Karen? Mr. Jennings raised an eyebrow. Karen is a board member with a personal agenda. She doesn't enforce rules neutrally. She picks targets and goes after them. If you're going to confront them, you have to be prepared. We left the office feeling a mixture of hope and dread. On the drive home, Mara kept glancing at the mailbox. Do you think they'll start again immediately? They probably already have, I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Harold doesn't take setbacks lightly. Back at the house, our fears were confirmed. Another envelope sat on the porch. I opened it carefully. This time, the HOA claimed we had improper spacing of driveway stones. Mara's eyes widened. They're just inventing things now. I know, I said. And if they see we're not scared, they'll escalate further. I called Harold, determined to confront him with the proof. He answered immediately, his voice smooth, calm, and infuriating. Mr. Turner, he said, how can I help you? I have proof that our property never joined the HOA, I said firmly. The fines are invalid. Harold's voice didn't falter. All residents are considered members. Rules apply. Compliance is expected. I have documents showing we never agreed to anything, I said, frustration rising. Documents are irrelevant, he said. The board decides membership. The board's decision is final. I slammed the phone down. Mara rubbed my shoulders. This is insane. We have proof and they just ignore it. They can't ignore it forever, I said, though my voice lacked confidence. We just need to prepare. Over the next few days we began documenting everything, every fine, every letter, every phone call. Mara contacted Linda to compare notes. Linda had fines for her mailbox flag, her garden, even her porch railing. She was scared but willing to help. It's like they're hunting us, she said, showing us a stack of letters she had collected. They want compliance, but they also want control. Mara and I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about intimidation, control, and fear. Harold and Karen thrived on it. That Friday, we decided to request a formal meeting with the board. Mara drafted a letter, clearly stating our proof and demanding they acknowledge it. I had my doubts. They might refuse, and I expected it. 2 days later, a response arrived. Harold's signature was at the bottom. The letter dismissed our documents, stating the board's interpretation of membership overrides any previous documents. I felt my stomach drop. They're refusing to even look, I said, holding the paper. They're not interested in facts. Mara's hands trembled slightly. Then we have to take them to court. They're forcing us. I nodded, swallowing hard. The thought of suing an entire HOA, facing legal fees and confronting Karen directly was exhausting. But there was no alternative. That evening, I drove by the neighboring homes. Linda's house had another envelope on her porch. Other neighbors were in similar situations, though we couldn't see the letters inside. The scale of it hit me. Harold and his board weren't just targeting us. They were building a system of fear and fines across the street, down the block, maybe even the entire subdivision. Mara joined me in the car, holding my hand. We're not alone in this, she said softly. But how many people are trapped like us? I shook my head, feeling the weight of it. Too many. And Harold, Karen, they're counting on people giving up. Late that night, as we went over the documents one more time, the doorbell rang. I froze. Mara's hand found mine, gripping tightly. I moved to the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. No one was there, but a thick envelope had been slipped under the door. My pulse quickened. Inside was a letter from the HOA's attorney. It stated they had received our proof, but due to ongoing obligations, the fines stand pending review. I felt a shiver run down my spine. They weren't bluffing. They were deliberately dragging this out, planning their next move. Mara whispered, "They're not just trying to win, they're trying to make us miserable." I nodded, staring at the letter. The fight was only beginning, and from the tone of the attorney it was clear Harold and Karen were already plotting their next strike. I set the envelope on the table and looked at Mara. We're stepping into a battle we can't see the end of yet. But we have to fight. They can't win. Then my phone buzzed. Another email from Harold. The subject line read, "Immediate board review, non-compliance escalation." I stared at the screen. The next move was coming, and it was going to be worse than anything we'd faced so far. The next morning, Mara and I arrived at the community center early. The board had agreed to meet, but I knew it was just a formality. Harold and Karen would use it to intimidate us, to test our limits. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old carpet. Karen was already there, sitting with her arms crossed, a smug smile that never reached her eyes. Harold stood beside her, clipboard in hand. 2 other board members, Ben and Gloria, were watching silently. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Turner," Harold began smoothly. "We appreciate you coming in. The board will review your concerns." I held my documents tightly, forcing myself to stay calm. "We have proof our property never signed the voluntary HOA documents," I said. "Every fine you've levied is invalid." Karen leaned forward. Proof doesn't change our standards. You've been non-compliant. The fines are still in effect until the board decides otherwise. I felt my jaw tighten. Non-compliant? We corrected every issue, followed every directive. You're inventing new violations weekly, Gloria cleared her throat. The board maintains authority on all matters. Compliance is ongoing. Mara's voice trembled slightly. You can't enforce rules on a property that never joined the association. Karen's eyes narrowed. Rules apply to the community, not just individual signatures. I could feel my patience fraying. The community, you're singling out certain houses. Look at Linda's place. The fines are targeted, not uniform. Ben shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Harold simply smiled. The board has discretion. Enforcement is at our discretion. I slammed a hand on the table. This is harassment. Karen leaned back, crossing her arms. Harassment? You'll find the definition in our governing documents. You've ignored the process. I realized then they weren't interested in truth or fairness. They were interested in control. The meeting continued, with me and Mara presenting document after document showing our proof of non-membership, the timelines of fines and correspondence. Karen and Harold dismissed everything. Every argument was met with a version of the same sentence: the board has final authority. By mid-afternoon we were exhausted. Our papers were scattered across the table, our voices HOAs from arguing. I felt the creeping panic in my chest. Then Harold stood and gestured toward the door. We'll take your documentation under review. You'll hear from the board. Mara exhaled. Relief washed over her. I tried to mirror her calm, but a cold dread settled in my stomach. We drove home silently. The streets looked normal, deceptively quiet. The calm hid the fact that Harold and Karen were already planning their next move. Back at the house, Mara suggested we contact other neighbors. Linda had already shared her stack of letters. We knocked on a few more doors. Most people were hesitant, scared of retaliation. One neighbor, James, admitted he'd quietly paid every fine to avoid conflict. Another, Rachel, had already tried to confront the board and received a threatening letter from Harold's attorney. It was worse than I imagined. This wasn't a few rogue fines, it was systematic. They were building fear one property at a time. That night we compiled everything and sent it to Mr. Jennings. His reply came in the early morning. The HOA's lawyer had acknowledged receipt but stated they were busy with ongoing matters and would respond in due course. I rubbed my temples. Busy? They're deliberately delaying. They want to frustrate us into giving up. Mara nodded. We need to stay strong. If we back down now, they win. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. I found it unnerving. Every time I opened the mailbox, I half expected another letter. The tension in the house was constant, invisible, but suffocating. Then, one evening, while I was adjusting the garden lights to match the approved pattern again, a car slowly rolled down the street. I noticed Harold behind the wheel. Mara was inside, arranging papers. I waved, trying to appear casual. Harold didn't wave back. He stopped across the street, got out, and walked toward the sidewalk near our house. I froze. He was carrying a clipboard and a camera. My stomach sank. Alex, he called. You'll want to step outside. We need to document another violation. I looked at Mara, panic rising. She grabbed my arm. Another violation. You've corrected everything. I didn't answer. Harold was already snapping photos of the garden, the walkway, even the lights we had painstakingly adjusted. Documentation is required for ongoing compliance, he said, his tone calm, almost polite. We need a record of any discrepancies. I clenched my fists. This is harassment. You have no right. Documenting is our right, he interrupted smoothly. Compliance is mandatory. And if there are further issues, fines will escalate. He stepped back, taking more photos, and then paused. His eyes darted toward Mara, then back at me. A thin smile crept across his face. Interesting, he murmured. I wonder what else we might find. I realized then that the intimidation was no longer about rules. Harold and Karen were playing a game, testing our limits, looking for any excuse to punish us further. As he walked back to his car, I felt a cold shiver. This wasn't just legal harassment anymore. It was personal. I looked at Mara, her face pale. We can't let this go any further, I said. She nodded, gripping my hand. But whatever we do, we need to be careful. He's watching everything we do. I stared at the fading taillights, knowing that Harold and Karen had just escalated again. The fight wasn't over. It was about to get much, much worse. And this time there was no warning, no space to breathe. The morning of the hearing, Mara and I arrived early, our arms full of files, letters, and evidence. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and fluorescent lights, an oddly cold combination. We had spent weeks preparing with Mr. Jennings, but the weight of what we were about to do pressed heavily on me. Are you ready for this? Mara asked, her voice quiet. As ready as I'll ever be, I said, trying to steady myself. Inside, Harold and Karen were already seated at the other table, their expressions perfectly calm, almost smug. Harold's clipboard sat in front of him, Karen's pen tapping against the wood, counting seconds, or maybe plotting. The judge called the session to order. "Mr. Turner," the judge said, glancing at our stack of documents, "you may begin." I took a deep breath, then laid out the story. The voluntary HOA, the letters, the fines, the repeated harassment. Mara handed the judge copies of every document, organized by date. I watched Karen's face, trying to see a crack in her composure. She leaned forward, attempting to interrupt. "Your Honor, the board," the judge raised a hand. "You will have your turn." "Mr. Turner, continue." I pressed on. I described the fines that had drained our savings, the invented violations, the intimidation tactics. I explained how Harold and Karen had deliberately ignored proof that we never agreed to join the HOA. Mara spoke next, calmly and clearly. She detailed the hours we had spent correcting violations, the absurdity of fines for mailbox alignment, garden stones, even porch lighting. She emphasized that the HOA's authority was voluntary, and that they had no legal grounds for enforcement. Karen's face tightened. Harold didn't react at all, his mask of calm unbroken. When it was their turn, Karen tried to argue that the rules applied to the community, and that fines were at the board's discretion. Harold nodded in agreement, trying to frame the issue as routine enforcement. Mr. Jennings stood, his voice steady and firm. "Your Honor, the board has acted outside its authority. The HOA is voluntary. No evidence exists that the Turners' property joined the association. Fines issued are unlawful, and their behavior constitutes harassment." He presented evidence of other neighbors, letters showing the same pattern, emails from the HOA's attorney admitting delays. The judge glanced at the documents, frowning. "I see," the judge said. "It appears the HOA has repeatedly overstepped its authority and engaged in improper conduct." Karen and Harold exchanged a look. For the first time I saw hesitation in Karen's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. The judge continued, "All fines imposed on the Turners are voided. Any payments made by the Turners must be reimbursed with interest. Furthermore, the board members responsible will be investigated for harassment and abuse of authority. Compliance must cease immediately, and the HOA's legal standing will be reviewed." A rush of relief hit me. Mara exhaled sharply, leaning against me. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the moment was tense. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Harold's calm mask had cracked slightly. As we left the courthouse, the street outside felt strangely bright. The neighborhood looked the same, but something had shifted. Harold and Karen were still there, standing on the corner watching, but the power they had wielded for so long was gone. Linda waved as we drove by. Her mailbox flag was crooked, the porch slightly untidy, and she grinned. "Looks like you won," she said. "I think we all won," Mara said, squeezing my hand. But the fight had left marks. We were exhausted, drained, our trust in quiet streets shaken. Even so, the victory was satisfying. The HOA could no longer enforce its rules arbitrarily, could no longer drain savings and manipulate fear. Karen's reign of intimidation was over. In the weeks that followed, letters stopped coming. The fines ceased. The board was forced to reorganize under legal oversight. Harold disappeared from the neighborhood, rumors spreading that he had resigned rather than face further investigation. Karen kept her distance, her smugness replaced with caution. Mara and I began reclaiming our home. We repaired the garden in our own style, arranged the porch however we liked, and laughed for the first time in weeks without worrying about a new letter arriving. Neighbors began speaking openly about fines they had paid, violations they had endured, and the fear Harold and Karen had instilled. The community started to rebuild trust, the tension fading from quiet streets. One evening, as the sun set, Mara and I sat on the porch sipping tea. The sky was a deep orange, the air warm but calm. "We did it," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied, watching the neighborhood around us. "Finally, it's over. No letters, no fines, no threats." The HOA that had terrorized us for years had been dismantled and Karen's power stripped away. The neighborhood could breathe again, and for the first time I felt at peace in the house we had fought so hard to protect. But I knew something lingered in the back of my mind. Authority abused once could be abused again. And though Harold and Karen were gone, the lessons we had learned, the way fear could spread quietly through a community, would stay with us forever. Still, for now we had won, and it felt like more than just a victory. It was freedom.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.